started way back. We lived in a small house, in a small cottage behind a house, if you believe it or not, on Clark Avenue in Palm Beach. And I ended up going to Palm Beach, what used to be Palm Beach Public, a private school at the time. Now it's Palm Beach Public. But interestingly enough, very, very early on, I don't ever remember not fishing in my entire life, and I got a hold of got over to the pier one day, and that was it. From then on, I basically lived on the pier, studied on the pier, spent weekends on the pier, go out on a Friday night, come back on a Sunday, do all my homework out there, barter for fish and everything else. So that kind of kicked me off and got me started in that direction. The Palm Beach Pier, it used to be at the end of Worth Avenue in Palm Beach. Oh my goodness, I've got a picture of the pier. This picture is dated 1936, and it really extended just a little farther out. You can see the reef line right here. There was a T out here that ultimately was built. This little cottage right here was removed, and we used to fish for sharks and hung the sharks right on this portion right here. It had a bar on one side, on the south side, and a coffee shop and everything on the other side. Then it had the tackle shop you went through was right about at that location there. And interestingly enough, you look at this picture and you see the old Lido pools back here. They were still there when I was fishing back, in the 50s and 60s. They were really heavy, but all this landscape, everything is totally changed. All these buildings are gone. Of course, Lido pools is gone. George DeBay when I first started fishing, had a tackle shop on the end out here, and then he moved his tackle shop right over here to some stores right here on the south side of Worth Avenue. But that gives you a kind of a glimpse of the pier back in those days. It was a wonderful place to go. You didn't have to pay for parking. The parking was all free. The pier was very inexpensive to get out there. I'll pick this up one more time. I had a locker. This was the locker room out here, and I had a locker that was like the third locker from the end on the inside on the south side. And the lockers at that time were $40 a year for a locker to fish on the pier, and that included your entrance to the pier. So you got on the pier free and everything else for $40 a year. It's pretty reasonable, very good price on the deal. So that's one reason why I was out there as a kid. Interestingly enough, I've got an old scrapbook. It's full of pictures, full of all kind of articles. And I didn't have a camera at the time. So these pictures were all given to me. And you have to understand the mindset from back in those days. The mindset was a shark is going to eat every person out there. And so we had all kind of paper articles that came out. I've got one that was, I don't have the exact date, but it came out in the 50s. Resorts accused of hiding shark bite news. This was all over the news all the time, all kind of stuff like this. And people were very, very concerned about people getting bitten by sharks. I forget exactly when this one was, but here's another article, intensive fishing urged to cut shark population. And interestingly enough, it goes all through all the people that were suggested, but it says Representative Rogers, and that's Paul Rogers at that time, announced that he had named yacht builder John Rybovich to head an area committee which would be formed within a week to study the shark matter, and he asked that each municipality and county officials be present to be a representative to serve on the committee. So, I mean, you even had the county and the city people all trying to kill sharks because they thought they were eating all the people on the beach. And this picture is just interesting because there I am in this picture right here. This was taken at the Sailfish Club at the time. Well, one of the things we did is we formed a shark fishing club on the pier, and I was catching sharks a long time before that. There's a picture of myself when I was about 13 tagging a shark, and we started doing work with Woods Hole and some of the research institutes when we got the shark fishing club formed, and that was one of the benefits, the side benefits. We did length, girth measurements, we did fecundity counts with which is the offspring and the size and shape and all those different types of things for those. We did parasites, internal, external, and all that stuff went to a lot of the different scientific organizations like Woods Hole and that type of thing. So there was a lot of benefits that came out of the work that we did. It wasn't just simply killing sharks, but we were in that mindset to try to do that back in those days. the club had organized tournaments, excuse me, and every 6 months we had a dinner and a big trophy presentation, and fortunately I was very, very fortunate in winning a great deal of those because the side benefits, we had pin reel trophy, which pin reels gave us all kind of reels. We didn't have the money to buy the big 9/0, 6/0, and some cases 12/0 reels that we used, so that was really a big, tremendous plus when you won the tournament. You got reels, you got big, heavy rods. Of course, most of the rods and everything we made ourselves. When I was on the pier, that was part of what I was doing. The sharks were anywhere from 5 feet all the way up to 12 or 13 feet in a lot of cases. And give you a representation, this is just a typical set of jaws that we got. I became very, very proficient in cleaning the jaws. This is out of about a 9.5 foot bull shark or ground shark. And you can see the large triangular shaped teeth there, and then they went smaller at the bottom. And they have lots and lots of rows. I don't know if you can see all these rows, but they have like 7 rows of teeth in the top and in the bottom. I became, like I say, very proficient in cleaning these because one of the sidelines that I did is I sold these to the tourists. And this one is a silky shark, similar type shark, but you can notice the difference in the size of the teeth. They're much different in shape and smaller and that type of thing. And that's the way, a lot of the ways you identify the sharks is by the size and shape and configuration of the teeth. But these jaws, I ended up selling these for like 25 to 50 bucks a piece. Back in those days, that was a lot of money. And that really put a lot of money in my pocket. So the side benefit from all of this was trying to sell the jaws as well. We grew up on the pier bartering fish, bartering everything. We didn't have a lot of money, but very quickly, when I got into fishing, I got pretty darn proficient in understanding what we want to try to target to try to make a few dollars. And rather than working, which I did for a couple of summers, tree trimming and stuff like that, that was a lot of work, and fishing was a lot better. So I would sell mackerel, bluefish, pompano, every kind of fish I could, kingfish, whatever you could catch, I was selling. I had paper routes at the time, working 7 days a week, morning and afternoon, except on Sunday, making $11 a week, and I was making a lot more money fishing. So by the time I was 11 years old, I was already fishing with my buddy Dave Platts, and we were literally selling everything, pompano, bluefish, mackerel, everything we could sell all the way back in those days. So it was a neat way to grow up. But the shark jaws, even the teeth, I sold the teeth and everything else out of it, you know. Anybody would come out on the pier, they would know you'd had shark jaws, and they would want to buy a set of shark jaws and hang up for whatever reason. And I only have a couple, maybe a dozen of these left that I didn't really sell, and I kept the different types of species. You asked a question about what types of sharks we caught. We caught everything in hammerheads and bulls and lemons and duskies and spinner sharks and tigers, and on and on and on and on. The list went on and on. We caught all different kinds of types of sharks out there. The neat part of trying to land one is that if you had a larger shark, what we did is I have a picture in here somewhere where this old scrapbook has fallen apart, but there's a picture in here somewhere. Here's one that when I was 13 years old, fighting a shark, and you just put the rod between your legs, which was a little tough, but that's the way you fought the shark. And then the way you cast was on the railing. You got up on the rail and you swung the bait up underneath the pier, and you lay it out on the pier. If you got a shark on, it was a good sized shark, it could take, you're in shallow water, so the shark can't go down, so they go out. And when they go out, they struggle, you have to struggle to get them back in. So that can be anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours to sometimes 3 hours with a real big shark that you had a shark on. And the interesting thing about it is that we would get the sharks beside the pier, we would shimmy down the pilings and throw a rope around them after we shot them. We would shoot the sharks first, and then go down, shimmy down the pilings, throw a rope around them, pull them back up on the pier, and then we hung them in that area where I was talking about on the pier, and the tourists could all see them. And the pier loved it because they would pull all the people off the beach, and they would pay $0.25 a piece to walk out and see the shark. So they would make a fortune on Saturdays and Sundays. They'd want the shark to hang up there until it was almost smelly, you know. And well, I brought an old 4570 that is this is an original gun. This gun is an antique. This version of this was in 1884. This is what they call a trapdoor Springfield. And first of all, I'm going to show you that it's, from the safety standpoint, that it's unloaded. This is the way you this is the way you cock the gun. And it's called a trapdoor Springfield because it's got this, what they call a trapdoor right here that falls down. The shells, I'll show you what one of the shells look like. This is the size bullet that we used to use to shoot these with. This is a black powder bullet. And as a matter of fact, this same gun was the gun that Custer used and lost the battle. He didn't wait, if you go back and look at your history, he didn't wait until the new supply of repeating rifles came in. He chose to go ahead and fight the Indians with the trapdoor Springfield. The Indians had repeating rifles and they had him outnumbered. So he was dead when he went out. He didn't realize that. But you can only get about 2 shots a time off at this thing, and which I found out from shooting this gun, because I shot not this this gun, but one very similar to this they had hanging up on the pier. The bullets would jam in here, and so the guys that were out there really had a tough time when they had Indians shooting at them, and the gun would jam. This has a ring on it, which is called a saddle carbine, and this, like I say, this is what Custer used and had. This is why it's so short. But with that big bullet and then this steel butt plate, this gun used to kick the living stew out of me. And when you shot it, you were shooting down at an angle that was putting the gun up on you in your shoulder. You were shooting down instead of shooting out. You were shooting down. It was cocked into your shoulder, so it really, the recoil really hurt you, and it would actually bruise my shoulder when I shot it. The first time we had a shark on, and somebody told me to run down and get the gun. I was 11 years old, and they came out. Everett Usher gave me the gun. He gave me 2 bullets, and I went running down the pier with the 2 bullets and the gun. And when I got down to where the shark was, nobody wanted to shoot the shark. And Everett had told me, all you have to do when you get out there is pull this up, drop the bullet in, put this down, and cock the hammer, and pull the trigger, and it would go off. That's the entire instructions he gave me at the time, which I didn't really have any more information than that when I went out, and I stood there and they were screaming, somebody shoot the shark, and nobody wanted to grab the gun. So I remember what Everett said. I cocked the thing, lifted it up, dropped the bullet in there, put it down, shot, and it went about that far over the shark, the first shot, because I was shooting down at an angle. So I did it again. I opened it up, cocked the gun, put it back down, aimed about that far below it, and killed the shark. From then on, I shot the gun God knows how many times over at the end of Worth Avenue, right straight at the end of Worth Avenue, shooting a 45-70, all the way up when I was 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, all the way up to where I was 18, 19, 20 years old. I shot that gun. And the interesting thing about it is that we would, as I said, the sharks were, you'd have a shark on for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe even 3 hours. The police officers would be down in a coffee shop, which I showed you there a little earlier. They would want to come out and shoot the shark. And several times they did, but they had 38 revolvers back in those days, not the Glocks today. And they would shoot it, and the shark wouldn't kill the shark. The shark would go frenzy, go around the piling, cut the person off, and they would be all upset. So every time we got a shark on, the people were all screaming, don't shoot to the police officers, let Jim shoot first. So I would shoot the shark, then they would unload their pistols. This is all happening at the end of Worth Avenue. The other gun was hanging up in the tackle shop just like this, with one ring through here and one ring holding this up as you walk through the tackle shop. And right underneath it, I mean, everybody could see it as soon as you walked in through the tackle shop. The gun was hanging there, and the bullets were right down, just down below it in a drawer. So every time they would only give me 2 shots, and after a while they would only give me 1 because they said, you don't miss. So that's kind of the story of the gun. That was the Juno Ball, the water tank, the golf ball, whatever. We oriented our fishing off of that, and as a matter of fact, the Kingfish fleet was kind of cued in on that area right there, and they would know north or south of the ball and that type of thing. But the pier, we caught a tremendous amount of sharks off the pier and snook and everything else. We used a raft off of that pier a lot and rowed out 300 and 400 and 500 yards. We'd strip all the way, every bit of the line off a reel, whatever you had, a 6/0 or a 9/0, and drop a bait with a big rock on it with a piece of monofilament holding the rock. And this would do this at night. And they only had 2 lights on the pier. There was one midway on Juno Pier and one on the end. And so the only reason why, because you got so far out, you couldn't holler and hear anybody. The only way you'd know to drop the baits, they'd turn the light off. So you drop the baits, and as soon as you drop the baits, then you'd start dropping 1, 2, 3, or 4 baits that you had on the back of this big raft that we went out. It was actually a big styrofoam, about that thick, 12-foot long old sailboat. We had a double paddle that we rowed out with. So, and we did that off the beach all the time, caught all kind of sharks off the beach. It was really interesting. The mackerel used to come in incredibly thick, and they would catch them all in the little span of the little bridge, and everything south of Peanut Island, all in that area down there. And when I was probably in high school, I really fished hard and did a lot of mackerel fishing in the lake. And what we did is we rented a boat at Layton's Park. We didn't have the money to get a motor, so we rowed out. Layton's Park was just north of the port, and it was located in near a trailer park, right? Layton's Park Trailer Park and Layton's Park had an area where they rented boats and motors and stuff like that down on the waterfront. So it was just north of the port. We'd row out and go past the basin and go down about where the channel marker is on the shelf on the south side of the basin, and we would just drop an anchor. And literally, what we did day in and day out is we did this so many times it was ridiculous. We would go down. My mom had an old Studebaker at the time, and Bill Purley and myself used to go all the time. We'd take 3 trash cans with us. Didn't have any ice, but the fish were biting so fast. We'd fill those 3 trash cans up in very quick time. We'd row back into Layton's Park, call my mom. She'd drive back and pick us up. We'd take the mackerel over to the pier, clean them, and we sold them to Benny's restaurant that was right there on Raw Palm Way at the time. And Benny was giving us really a big deal, because when we cleaned them, we got 10 cents a fillet. If you sold a fish whole, you got a nickel. So it was, even so, it was still big money, because you could buy a drink and a great big giant candy bar for lunch, and that's all you could eat for 15 cents. So we were making pretty darn good money back in those days. But the fishing used to be phenomenal back when those mackerel would come in. They would come in just absolutely solid. I mean, it was just amazing. This is in the 60s, but we still had sporadic fish coming in, but nothing like what they did back in those days. I really look back on what I did as the golden age of fishing, because it was the best time for me that we ever had. I mean, I wouldn't give up my youth for anything, because my memories are so vivid. You had free parking, everything was free, you could get to everything. You didn't, I remember when I got our first TV set, so we didn't have all those distractions. People built things themselves. They built their own rods. We built all of our own feathers that we fished for mackerel with. I never bought a feather, except a few that I bought out of the outdoor store, but we built most of our own feathers. And George DeBay taught me that, and another fella taught me how to do that. But when you look back on all of those things and you didn't have a lot of money, you had to figure out ways to try to make a living and make ends meet. And literally, I fished all the way through grade school, high school, junior college, and then went to University of Miami and fished there, and fished the entire time, and saved all my money, and literally made a big portion of my college career paid for by fishing, and I didn't waste it because it was too hard to come by. So I paid for all my stuff at the pier, the locker and everything else, and bartered like crazy. But we had fish back in those days as good as what I think that they had back in the earlier days. And I mean, they had talked about catching 40, 50, 60 snook back in the 20s and 30s. We did the same thing. You know, we caught that many fish. We averaged kingfishing. When I started fishing with Dave heavy on the kingfish, I was also doing the same thing there, sending information to the lab over in St. Pete on length, girth, stomach contents, and stuff like that. I did that for an entire year, one season when we fished, and lo and behold, came to the aspect that, wow, you know, we had over 1,000 pounds average every day catches of kingfish, day in and day out. And some days we'd catch 1,650. Some day we'd get 750. The next day we'd get 1,850. Some days you'd get 450. But it averaged out over 1,000 pounds. And back in those days, it was commercial fishing. We sold fish to Penders, to Hudgens, to all the different places that had where you sold fish, and they all had the account of who caught what the day before, and it became kind of a lot of pride in knowing that you were right up in the top boat or the top 10 boats or something like that for catching fish, because it was like something like you got like a feather in your hat. You know, you weren't out there just, you know, getting in the way of the other guys and not really putting a lot of fish in the boat. So Dave and myself were right up there a whole lot of the times, and a lot of the times we were high boat. So, you know, you're fishing against the Penders and people like that. It was amazing to be able to do that back in those time frames. I had a opportunity to, when I was going to Miami, I was coming home on the weekends, and so I would come home and fish Saturday and Sunday, and I mean fish like 14 hours Saturday and then maybe 10 hours, 11 hours Sunday. I'd have to cut short because I'd have to go back down and drive back down to Miami. So we were coming in on a Sunday afternoon, and lo and behold, this is right before Kennedy was killed. Next week he was killed, but we were coming right by Ann's Dock, which is right inside the inlet on the south side, and the Honey Fitz was right there, just putting in real slow in towards Peanut Island, and had two boats that were patrolling right beside it, but that's it. Just two boats, you know, with two guys into the boat. And here's the president and two other guys sitting in the back smoking cigars with martinis in their hand. And I'm coming in, Dave's driving the boat, and I'm coming in and gutting fish. And I'm just looking down and gutting fish and looking down and gutting fish and throwing them in one box, throwing them into the other box. And I happened to look up, and here's the Honey Fritz. I said, holy George, I'm looking at the Honey Fritz. So it was one of those days where you could hear a pin drop. And we were just putting in because we had a lot more fish. I had a lot more fish to gut. Dave was driving, of course. And so while I was gutting the fish, I looked up, here's the boat, and we got within 25 or 30 feet of the stern of the Honey Fritz, passing right by. And I looked up and I said, oh my God, to myself, that's the president. I said, hello, Mr. President, just like that. He waves right back and he says, what kind of fish is that you're throwing over there? I said, they're kingfish, sir. And he said, you get a lot of them? I said, well, we did all right. We got about 1,000 pounds a day. And he said, my goodness, that's a lot of fish. I said, well, that's good for a half a day, you know. And so I kept talking to him, and I said a couple other things, and then waved goodbye. He waved goodbye. And Dave, in his real kind of sarcastic scrutiny of me, he says, well, do you want me to stop the boat so you can continue your conversation with the president? I said, no, Dave, that's all right. We got too many fish to gut. But we went right by the president. You could not do that today. I mean, I could have thrown one of those kingfish in his boat if we were close enough, you know. To see that, you know, you're shooting sharks at the end of Worth Avenue and telling the cops not to shoot until you shoot and go right by Kennedy. That's what I'm saying. We had the best of times growing up with the best fishing and unencumbered with limits. There were no limits on the numbers, amounts of fish you could catch. You didn't have all that. Today you need a scorecard to go out and fish. So it's a whole lot different today. And that's why I say I lived through the golden age of fishing. Interestingly enough, the pier got blown down in a storm. I have a picture here. I think you have a close-up of it, but you can see where the mid portion of the pier is missing right here. That's where the locker room was located. And there was an offshore storm that created these huge waves that came rolling in. The date on this picture is March 9, 1962. March the 8th is when the pier actually went down. And crazy enough, I rode across the top of here. I was on it, and when the first part fell and I saw it, I was literally on the pier. I had walked out on the pier, and when I got to the western edge of the locker room, I heard this horrendous cracking noise. I can still remember it today. It was like almost like an earthquake under my feet with all this cracking and crumbling and grinding. And what happened is just outside on the east side of the locker room, from literally 2 feet on the east side of the locker room, fell to the south end of the waterway, if you will, and went all the way up to almost to the T. And that great big V was laying down in the water. And when I was at the west end, I heard all this noise and cracking, and I went flying back out on the pier and stopped, and almost slid right off the darn thing over the V that fell down into the south, and literally grabbed my key out of my pocket, jerked my locker door open. I had, like I said, 19 rods I had built, grabbed all 19 at one time and waddled down the pier with them. And there was only one other guy, Maury Vorenberg, that was there. I said, Maury, the pier's going down. So he came, I grabbed a box, threw reels in it, everything that was any kind of real big value I threw in there, and he grabbed his rods, and we came running down to the pier, and I was trying to get them down, and by that time the police had heard that the pier was going down, and I tried to get past them. I was trying to get past them, and they literally tackled me and would not let me go back out and get the rest of my stuff out of the locker. But the lockers went down, everything went down about roughly 30 minutes to an hour later. The whole locker room fell to the south, and everybody's tackle and everything that was in it was lost. So Maury and myself were the only two that literally got anything out of our lockers, and I happened to be over there that night because crazy enough, we were fishing for sharks, but the current was so strong we couldn't fish. We had just walked down to the coffee shop, and I said, I'm going back out and double check my locker just for the heck of it. And when I got to, like I say, that western side of the locker room, I heard this big crack, and that was something I'll never ever forget as long as I live. That was the end of the pier for all practical purposes. It stayed out there as a stub, I think, until 1968, then it was taken down. You'd never get another pier built back at the end of Worth Avenue today in a million years. So that's what I say. I lived through that golden age.